So indeed, nice to meet all of you. I'm Alex Chunet. I work at the European Space Agency in the Long-Term Action Section and the Earth Observation Programs Directorate. And I will tell you a bit more about our activities in Africa, and more specifically also in the second part of the presentation about the activities that are being implemented under the two pillars that were mentioned. That were just mentioned, so that are being jointly implemented by the European Space Agency and the African Space Agency slash the African Union Commission. So I will essentially complement what Cecilia just mentioned in the second part of my presentation. So first of all, ESA's Earth observation vision is really to take the pulse of our planet, and in order to do so, the European Space Agency relies on world-class Earth observation systems that were developed with European and global partners to address scientific and societal challenges, right? So there is a multitude of satellites in orbit that have been sent in the past, that are currently in orbit, or that will be sent soon, and that allow us to essentially produce about 7 petabytes of data over Africa, of Sentinel data over Africa. So there is a huge amount of data that we can build on, and which we should take advantage of in order to essentially increase efficiency and impact of project, and in order to monitor different variables for sustainable for sustainable development, essentially. It's important also to recall that the role of space in climate and sustainability is becoming more crucial than ever. Space supports climate and sustainability efforts by providing data, technologies, and infrastructure. And space applications offer essential data to support the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets associated with those SDGs, which will be implemented with the support of space technologies. So considering the extent of Africa, 30.3 million square kilometers, there is huge potential for the continent to benefit specifically from Earth observation information in its digital transformation. And in order to release the full potential of those technologies, ESA, so the European Space Agency, is partnering with different institutions globally, and in particular in Africa. So we could highlight the following specifically when we mention those different angles and those different partnerships. First, the long-standing partnership with the African Union Commission, also the national African space agencies like SANSA, AGEOS, ACES, NARSTA, as well as the scientific EO community in Africa. That's really an asset in this collaboration between Europe, ESA, and the African continent. Second is the facilitation of Copernicus data access with a range of regional and national African stakeholders, including the Observatoire du Sahel et du Sahara et du Sahel. And so some of those essentially agreements were signed with the OSS, so the Observatoire, and also NARSTA. That essentially leads to African ownership and sharing of Copernicus data on the continent. Then second would be the support to cloud computing uptake for Earth observation in Africa with trainings, tools, and the Dunia platform. Third would be the support also across data access to capacity development with the GMES and Africa initiatives through the African Union Commission. And finally, the continuous community interaction with African and European actors from institutions, academia, and private sector, which also is the case today. That also includes, like you can see in the lower right picture, visits from African stakeholders on our premises at ESRIN with, for example, 12 African countries and disaster risk management units and agencies from 12 African countries that visited our offices to discuss about the potential of those technologies. So I will be very quick on this one because it was already mentioned also by Linda at the beginning of the call, but there was this EO for Africa symposium that was organized in 2024, and it was co-organized with the African Union Commission, ARCE, the European Commission, EUMETSAT, and NASA, essentially. And it gathered around 300 participants on site, 500 online, and that was a great occasion to gather the different communities from Europe and from Africa to have this discussion and this dialogue on the use of Earth observation technologies. In terms of concrete programs, there are several programmatic vehicles used by ESA to deploy its activities and support the use and uptake of Earth observation technologies in Africa. I would like to highlight three of them more specifically. First, the ESA's Climate Change Initiative, which essentially allows to provide essential climate variables that are of huge value in mapping change over the African continent. Second would be ESA's Science for Society program, and in particular the EU Africa initiative, which works with through which we work with the African Union Commission on many research and development projects based on satellite data to develop innovative open source application adapted to African specific challenges. And so in the context of this one specifically, there was a recent common call that resulted in the award of 15 new projects led by a tandem of African and European scientists. And third, the third program I wanted to mention is the Global Development Assistance Program, through which essentially we're collaborating with international financial institutions such as the World Bank, the African Development Bank, for more uptake of these innovative Earth observation applications. Sorry, the light went off in my booth, but I guess you can still see me. So this Global Development Assistance Program that essentially through which we collaborate with international financial institutions and we develop this coordinated and complementary approach for the uptake of Earth observation technologies also in Africa. Considering that around 50%, I would say, or even more of the projects we support through this program are actually projects that are being implemented in Africa. Now, coming back to what was just mentioned by Cecilia before in the previous presentation, there is also, of course, the Africa-EU Space Partnership Program. So this new flagship program has been launched in 2025 and is the and essentially contributes to the Global Gateway Africa-Europe investment package, and it aims to support Africa for a strong, inclusive, green and digital recovery and transformation by accelerating the twin green and digital transition. So this is financed by the INPA as part of the Global Gateway Strategy, as I was mentioning. And as mentioned by Cecilia, Pillars 1, which is about institutional cooperation and support to the setup of the African Space Agency, and Pillar 3, which is about strengthening the African private Earth observation sector ecosystem and new space ecosystem, are being tackled through joint activities and the joint implementation between the African Union Commission and ESA. And the phase 1 is going to be implemented over a period of 4 years starting this year. And again, this is financed by DG INPA. So if you allow me to spend a bit more time on the different subcomponents of that are being implemented under those two pillars. First, there is one that essentially targets the first pillar I was mentioning, which is the institutional cooperation. So that will aim again at supporting the setup of the African Space Agency and its operationalization, essentially. That will consist in activities such as the setup of joint task forces to help with the identification of priorities for the continent on space technologies and on the use of those technologies. So that would entail a joint task force on Earth observation, one on navigation, one on telecommunication, and one on space science. That will also entail technical assistance activities through the implementation of analytical reports and assessments. For example, a design study for a concurrent design facility or a CubeSat test facility. Also, on this same task, we will have some trainings that will be provided to public officials, national agency staff, and also future African Space Agency staff. And finally, under this specific task, we'll have also the elaboration and the setup of an innovative user engagement tool, which we call an Africa EO newsroom. So that would be the institutional cooperation part. The second part is the part on new space. We have a task that is specifically dedicated to new space and through which a new space preparatory program will be set up, aimed at training essentially African researchers or early career professionals on engineering related to new space, also to have some CubeSat hands-on training. So it's really something that will aim at transferring potentially skills related to new space technologies to African stakeholders on the continent. It will also entail co-design for EO smallsat. I mean, there will be essentially a study that will allow and that will help in identifying potentially angles on which the African ecosystem could contribute to the value chain of new space technologies, right? And this study essentially will be implemented under this specific task. What's especially important for the implementation of this task is essentially to have something that is coordinated and jointly implemented with the Europe and Africa consortium. But I will, in any case, come back to this idea of the recruitment of the consortium and the upcoming public tenders that will be published just at the end of this presentation. Third task really addresses the private sector ecosystem cooperation. So this really focuses on providing support to the adoption of Earth observation downstream applications and technologies within the private sector with the specific, I would say, aim at supporting startups on the African continent. That will entail the implementation of trainings for those startups, the organization of challenges and hackathons, but also the setup of a business development scheme that will entail the distribution of grants and also the implementation of mentoring and also matchmaking exercises and events for those startups and those private companies. In addition to this support that will be provided at continental level to the private sector ecosystem, there is also one pilot national African business innovation lab that will be implemented and set up in a specific country, which is still being essentially picked. And that will replicate the experience of the Phi lab that we have also here on the ESRIN premises. And last but not least, actually, we also have a kind of a separate activity that really focuses exclusively on Nigeria. It's a national cooperation with NARSTA on new Earth observation applications with a focus on AI innovation. Right, so that gives you kind of an idea of the different activities we're going to implement. The last two slides I wanted to show you are the following. This one is more on a call for coordination and collaboration, right? Because as Linda was mentioning at the beginning, we really want to have sustainable and long-term impact. So what that means is that we'll be actively looking also to partner and collaborate with stakeholders in Africa and in Europe to coordinate our capacity building activities for public officials, to coordinate also on the training of the private sector on the continent, to essentially have also sequential support on the support to the startups and potentially their financing and scaling. How can we coordinate those activities with impact funds and investment funds if possible? And finally, also links to new space activities for students and researchers. This is just some ideas of collaboration and synergies on which we'll actively be looking for collaboration partners, but of course there could be others. And now the last slide is really about how can African entities potentially participate in those activities. So all the activities I've mentioned, most of them actually will be implemented through public tenders that are planned to be issued around May, June for the first batch, I would say, and the largest part, and then for the activities to be kicked off in the second half of the year, probably the third or fourth quarter. For those activities, we'll be actively looking to recruit or to have on board Europe consortia that are composed of both European and African entities, right? This is, I think, very crucial to the success of this whole activity and this whole initiative. So we are very much looking forward to receiving potentially proposals from teams that are constituted of both European and African entities. And you will be able to essentially find those tenders on the ESA Star platform, which is the logo at the top right. ESA, not slash, but ESA-star. And then there's a specific function on this platform, which is the ESA match function that should allow you also potentially to find partners if you wish to use it. So essentially, those tenders will appear as intended tenders soon on the platform. Then they will be published with all the information on what is essentially expected in May or June. And you should be able to also find partners through this function. However, of course, you should be able to use your own networks in order to find those partners and form those potential consortia that will send proposals for the implementation of those activities. Right. So that's about it regarding the different messages I wanted to convey, and I'm happy to answer any questions.